Alright, number 10, Anti-Monitor. During the events of Forever Evil, the crime syndicate of America of Earth 3 invades the Prime DC universe, escaping the threat of their complete destruction back on their homeworld. For almost the entire comic event, the CSA all allude to the threat that destroyed their home and just how terrifying it is. The threat itself even makes a cut in the universal barriers just trying to make its way into the Prime universe. After the CSA have been defeated in an awesome fight with Earth's villains, Superman speaks about how the threat they spoke of has to be Darkseid, and he begins preparing for Darkseid's return. But for us readers, we get to learn that the true enemy the CSA were running from was actually the incredibly powerful Anti-Monitor, who had destroyed almost all of Earth 3's reality. It's a cool reveal that leads straight into Darkseid War. Number 9, Ultron. Ultron is a villain that really just pops up over and over as he constantly reinvents himself in different ways. Now, one of his biggest reinventions was when he created an Age of Ultron, which became the name of the 2013 crossover series. Here, he finally achieved his goal of taking over the world. He created machines to hunt down anyone who failed to submit to his rule, with only a small group of heroes surviving and trying to oppose the mad Ultron. He was finally brought down by a program planted in his design by his creator, Hank Pym, after a time-traveling Sue Storm and Wolverine warned Pym of the future threat Ultron would pose. There is also his whole character arc in the MCU's What If animated series as well, which was honestly really cool to watch, and I did not expect it to go the way it went. Number 8, Armless Tiger Man. You may be wondering who the heck Armless Tiger Man even is, and you know what? That's fair. Honestly, his return is not the only thing we never saw coming, because his creation was something I never saw coming. But here we are with a German amputee with pointy ears, sharpened teeth, and enough leg strength to bend steel. He had an incredibly brief career during World War II and was eventually taken out in Wakanda by one of the Howling Commandos. But what was really surprising was when he reappeared in Incredible Hercules number 129 to 131 in 2009. He was among a group of individuals that were the Greek god Pluto's jury of the undead, and they together put Zeus on trial and subdued Herc himself. If you guys are enjoying this video, or you like this channel, make sure you drop a like to let us know that you like what we're giving you. And in number 7 is Superboy Prime. During the massive Dark Knights Metal event, the Trinity of Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman go to a collection of 3 dark multiverse worlds that each have the 3 main crises from DC Comics happening on repeat. Only each of these worlds' crises are happening differently than they were supposed to. Wonder Woman ended up in the world where the Infinite Crisis is constantly on repeat. Only in this world, the heroes lost and Wonder Woman is met by Superboy Prime, who hasn't shown up in the DC universe for quite some time now. Now, he isn't entirely a villain, like he definitely has been, but he has always wanted the best outcome, but usually in the worst ways possible. But now, in this death metal event, he fights toe-to-toe against the Batman Who Laughs and seemingly destroys him. Or does he? Number 6, Uranos. The Eternal known as Uranos first ever appeared in Marvel What If number 24 in September of 1980, in a story that explained the origins of the Eternals. Now, in this story, Uranos is trying to convince his brother Kronos that the Eternals should use their massive amounts of power to take over the world. He believed the Eternals would best fulfill their duties if they exterminated both the deviants and humans on Earth, all life outside the universe, and then imprison the Celestials. But his brothers Kronos and Oceanus disagreed, sparking the Eternals' civil war. The war culminated in his defeat and banishment to the planet Uranus. Surprise though, this isn't actually what happened. The Uranos, who was banished to another planet, was actually a clone, and the real Uranos was banished to the Exclusion, which is where Thanos and Druig go in the recent Eternals: The Heretic story from 2021. Here we are introduced to a very different looking Uranos, who becomes the weapon of Druig against the mutant population in the Judgment Day event. Number 5, Magneto. Speaking of the Judgment Day event, in the X-Men Red comics, the story actually featured a whole Magneto comeback all of its own, which was incredibly awesome, and I think it deserves a mention. Magneto isn't really a full-on villain anymore. He has an incredibly complex moral compass, which makes him more like an anti-hero than anything else. He's a fan favorite, which is why it was incredibly hard to watch him get his heart completely ripped out of his chest by Uranos during Judgment. After Uranos had completely decimated the population living on Mars though, Magneto reveals that he is actually still alive, using his powers to control the iron in his own blood to keep his blood flowing. He used his power to carry on surviving without a heart. It's completely insane and totally awesome. Number 4. Dr. Doom. In 2009's Fantastic Four number 566, Dr. Doom reveals that he had actually learned everything he knows from one incredibly powerful reality warping villain called the Marquis of Death. Doom also dropped the little tidbit that the Marquis would be showing up. Only when the Marquis did show up with his new apprentice, he was less than happy with the progress Doom had made on Earth, and he attacked. The Marquis warped reality, made Doom think he had won, then snatched the victory away, set him on fire, turned his heart to stone and his blood to acid, then sent him back in time to the Pliocene age to be eaten by megalodons. The Marquis goes on to fight the Fantastic Four, almost beating them, and then, when the Marquis is on his last legs, his apprentice shows up and straight up slaps and destroys him, but not before revealing that he is actually Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom survived being eaten by a megalodon, gained enough power and dark magic to completely change his form, he became the Marquis' apprentice again, and even defeated Uatu the Watcher so he wouldn't be discovered. All of that to get his revenge and finally defeat the Marquis of Death. Number 3. Vulcan. We're going back to the X-Men Red story yet again. I'd say I'm sorry, but I kinda love this story, so I'm not. How everything happens is still being somewhat explained, but what we do know is that Vulcan is being used as a pawn on a chessboard by Abigail Brand, the director of S.W.O.R.D., which is like S.H.I.E.L.D. but in space. So basically, on the planet Mars is a mutant population called the Iraqi, and they are pretty combat focused. They decide who makes up their governing council with trial by combat. Well, when Vulcan made a play to make it onto that council in issue 3, he was very much defeated. Like, it seemed like he passed away. But it turns out that Abigail Brand either resurrected him through the mutant resurrection protocol or helped heal him, as in issue number 9 of the comic, he shows up out of nowhere again and is essentially challenging the Empress of the Shi'ar Empire, believing himself to still be their emperor like he was all those years back. Number 2. Starro. Sometimes when villains return, they don't always go back to their villainy, and they don't always come back in the way you might expect. The intergalactic conqueror known as Starro has been an enemy of the Justice League for years. He has given them a run for their money many times, and since he's been around so long, he has danced around with his morality. Well, Starro was eventually defeated and he pretty much perished. Sort of. Batman seems to have taken a part of this giant starfish and put it under his care to assist him and the Justice League with its incredible psychic capabilities. This new creation is called Jarro, and he is awesome. Starro himself isn't actually completely gone, as we find out a bit later, but Jarro just wants to make his dad, aka Batman, proud. He even dresses up as a Robin to try to be the best Robin ever. It's fantastic. And in at number 1, Sinestro. Sinestro is Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps' greatest enemy. He was imprisoned in the Central Battery on Oa during the events of Emerald Twilight, where Hal Jordan went completely bonkers. In a last-ditch effort to defeat him, the Guardians released Sinestro in an attempt to stop Hal Jordan from destroying the Corps, and their battle was brutal. It eventually came down to a bare-knuckle fistfight, and Sinestro drove Jordan to go over the edge and snap Sinestro's neck, taking him down permanently. But this is a list of returns. So, in a later retcon, it was revealed that the Sinestro that Jordan snapped was really a light construct, and that Sinestro and the Parallax entity were actually the ones responsible for Hal Jordan's descent into villainy. So now, all the Hal Jordan fans can rest assured their hero is still squeaky clean. And honestly, a really cool return for a really awesome villain. Alright, coming in at number 10, Mar-Vell. Let's start part 2 off a little differently, with a hero who returns as a villain. Mar-Vell of the Kree was Marvel Comics' original Captain Marvel, and he was also the first Marvel superhero to permanently pass away when he succumbed to cancer in 1982's The Death of Captain Marvel. The character has reappeared in visions or in flashbacks, and obviously in alternate realities. One of my actual favorites of that is Mar-Vell of the Cancerverse. It's just a really cool and creative idea. Basically, on his famous deathbed, the many-angled Angled Ones contacted and corrupted the dying Mar-Vell, granting him new powers which he used to transmute the other heroes, and with Mar-Vell as their lord, they took down the Avatar of Death, which in turn completely destroyed Death itself, allowing the many Angled Ones to invade their reality. Number 9. Jor-El. Good guys coming back as bad guys is fun, but some of you may not have liked this one. Jor-El and his wife Lara are extremely famous for shooting their son Kal-El into space using the last remaining prototype spaceship and allowing themselves to succumb to the destruction of their home planet, Krypton. Kal-El landed on Earth, grew up as Clark Kent, and became Superman. Well, in Superman Volume 3, number 32, we are introduced to a villain known as Mr. Oz. And just to ruin the whole point of Jor-El's sacrifice and kind of the whole mythos of Superman, it turns out that Mr. Oz is Jor-El. As Krypton was crumbling away, Jor-El was whisked away by a mysterious force, who was Dr. Manhattan. Shh, don't tell. He was brought to Earth where he crashed in a war-torn nation where Jor-El was forced to witness the atrocities of man. Jor-El adopted the moniker of Mr. Oz and began manipulating certain events from behind the scenes to try and, I don't know really, make humanity good, I guess? The surprising reveal was not expected, but it wasn't really welcome either. Number 8. The Red Skull. Okay, so there are a few times the Red Skull has reappeared over his comic book life. Actually, there's a lot. But I want to move over to the MCU for this one, because when he just happened to be a floating wraith-like being chilling on Vormir in Infinity War, I actually verbally went, what? So, at the end of Captain America: The First Avenger, the Red Skull puts his evil hands on the Tesseract, and it opened up this big old window into space, and the Red Skull started like being ripped all apart to pieces and then shot through that window looking thing. So it turns out that that was actually a wormhole, and he was pulled through it and landed on Vormir, where he became stuck in a state of limbo, and he had no choice but to serve as the Soul Stone Stonekeeper. After Thanos gave up Gamora to gain the stone, Red Skull became free to do whatever he wanted, and so who knows if he'll ever reappear again. Number 7. The Joker. In the Three Jokers story from 2020, 3 crimes were committed on the same night, seemingly all by the Joker. Thanks to Batman's time on the Mobius chair during Darkseid War, he knows that there are indeed 3 Jokers running around Gotham. The original Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, the Killing Joke Joker, known as the Clown, and the Silver Age Joker, known as the Comedian. Jason Todd, Barbara Gordon, and Batman himself all team up to go after each Joker one at a time. It doesn't nearly go that smoothly. This is one of the best Joker stories in recent years. It almost feels like it stands alone outside of any kind of continuity. It's incredibly good, and the revelation of 3 different Jokers was something a lot of people just never expected. But what I think is even better than 3 Jokers is the chaotic feeling of not knowing if there was actually 3 or if there is a definitive Joker until the end when you find out. Number 6. Green Goblin. Green Goblin's most despicable act would have to be the passing of Gwen Stacy. It was shocking, and it caused Spider-Man to beat the heck out of him before Gobby was famously impaled by his own glider. Boom. Done. The end. Well, no. Little did anyone know that Norman Osborn was in fact alive and devising a master plan that he hoped would ruin Spider-Man forever. His goblin formula apparently gave him powerful regenerative abilities which allowed him to survive the impalement, and Norman fled to Europe. Osborn manipulated events from the shadows to have Peter Parker believe he was in fact a clone, and that Ben Reilly, who was a clone, was the original Peter Parker, eventually revealing himself and taking down Ben, who sacrificed himself to save Peter. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Riley's body disintegrated, proving that Peter Parker was in fact the real Peter Parker and Spider-Man all along. But by this point, everyone had truly accepted that Green Goblin was just out of the picture. Number 5. Doc Ock. Another interesting take on the return of a villain. Doc Ock is near the end of his life, but you never really stop being a villain. So, in an incredibly surprising twist, he figures out how to swap minds with Peter Parker. So now, Doc Ock has seemingly defeated his #1 foe and defeated death itself, as he now inhabits Peter Parker's body as the superior Spider-Man. Calling it a return is a bit of a play on words, as he never really leaves for a length of time, but he returns from his imminent demise as his #1 nemesis, and he even kind of outdoes Peter as a hero, if not of a bit of a brutal one. He eventually gives Peter back his body, and after inhabiting a few other bodies, he eventually returns back to his own after a deal with Mephisto. Number 4. Rakil. You may not even even know who Raquel is? Well, she was the totally awesome empress of the Skrull Empire. She took control of the empire from her father's usurper. She was empress of the Skrull Empire up until their homeworld's destruction at the hands of Galactus. After this, she was assumed to have perished with the planet back in 1983. Well, no. In 2020's Empire event, it's eventually revealed that Raquel found out about her son, Hulkling, and so she teleported away from the Skrull homeworld before its destruction. She then embedded herself deep in the Kree Empire as Tanalith, a Kree prisoner. She worked her way up the ranks of the Kree with the intention of merging both the Kree and the Skrull empires, but for her own motives. Number 3. Bullseye. The villain Bullseye is actually one of the more brutal villains from Marvel Comics, in my opinion. But this is seemingly proof of that fact. In Daredevil Volume 1, issue number 181 from 1981, that's a lot of ones, Bullseye has been hired by Kingpin only to find himself replaced by Elektra. In his anger, he uses his throwing cards and her own Psi to take her out of the picture permanently. Unfortunately for him, Elektra and Daredevil are very close, and Daredevil is not a fan of this. After a heated battle high on the rooftops, Daredevil lets Bullseye fall to what most thought was his demise. It was honestly really shocking for fans of the hero, but it turns out that instead Bullseye had indeed survived his fall, but was now paralyzed with a broken spine. It wasn't until Deadpool Volume 3 number 34 from 1999 that he gets his bones laced with adamantium by Lord Darkwind, allowing the villain to finally recover and go back to his mercenary duties. Number 2. Kraven the Hunter. In Kraven's Last Hunt, Kraven the Hunter tracked down Spider-Man, beat him up pretty badly, buried him alive, wore his costume, ate some spiders, and then took his own life. Was it messed up? Absolutely it was, but it was also possibly the best comic he'd ever been in until that point, and a big going out moment for the villain. He even got replacements with other members of his family going on to fight Spider-Man. He was gone, done, out of the picture, but then out of nowhere came the Grim Hunt, where that same family, who stepped in to successfully replace him, found a way to revive him using Kane Parker's body, who they thought was Peter Parker. I think it was unexpected because it was just kind of unnecessary and a little convoluted, but the Grim Hunt was cool, so I wasn't really complaining. And in at number 1, the leader and Abomination. Okay, I'm gonna get like a little meta here, and also I got 2 for 1 in this one, so combo for you guys. The MCU's Incredible Hulk movie has always kind of been a bit of a black sheep. Obviously, Bruce Banner morphed into looking like Mark Ruffalo after previously looking a lot like Edward Norton, but a large majority of the characters, except for Everett Ross, just kind of disappeared from any later MCU stories. But now, thanks to Shang-Chi and the She-Hulk show, we got back Emil Blonsky, aka Abomination, played by Tim Roth. And in the new Captain America movie that is going to be coming out soon, we will also be getting back Samuel Stearns, who started to become the leader at the end of the Hulk movie, and was played by Tim Blake Nelson. Now, what I really want to know is if we are going to get back Ty Burrell playing Doc Samson, because I would love to see him with the green hair.
Number 10. Black Mask. Black Mask was killed by Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman. She shot Black Mask point blank, killing him as revenge for what he'd done to those she loved and cared for, chiefly burning down a building in Selena's hood on the east side, which she was trying to help and was kinda under protection, and for hurting her sister Maggie in an irreparable way and basically driving her insane. However, surprisingly, this would not be the end of Black Mask. Black Mask would return as a Black Lantern during the Blackest Night event and would eventually even return to life, surprising many folks, Selena included. But I mean, Black Mask is so great. How can you just let that villain go? You can't, unless it's Birds of Prey, and then he's probably gone forever in the DCEU. Number 9. Mr. Sinister. One of the weirdest comebacks was when Mr. Sinister created a failsafe in the case of his death, which did inevitably happen. Sinister basically intended to come back via the mutant youth he had once experimented on, who are now all grown up. When this failed, he planned a backup for that backup. Claudine Ranko became Miss Sinister, but as startling as that transformation was, we were even more startled when Mr. Sinister suddenly returned through her, basically bursting out of her Miss Sinister form, overriding even his Miss Sinister, part Claudine, part Sinister self, and coming back entirely, at least for a few pages, until he could find a more permanent solution later on, when he would fully return via a clone. Also, he literally burst out of Miss Sinister, like literally was like, pop, here I am. It was weird and creepy and definitely super memorable. I know I found it shocking. I don't know if you found it shocking, but I did. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving our channel here on Top 10 Nerd, please go check us out over on Facebook, where we also have cool stuff, and we're also going to be having some exclusive things coming your way. In fact, at the time that this goes up, I think there will already be something super exclusive over there. You won't want to miss it, so make sure you are following us there as well. Number 8. Kite Man. Kite Man is often relegated to the C-list villains in the DC universe. He's often considered one of Batman's lamest villains, and yet via the Harley Quinn animated series, he saw a revitalization of his character, with him even getting a solid fan base due to how he was depicted in the show. I love when things like this happen to C-listers like Kite Man or Polka Dot Man, a lot of mans out there, or even characters like Peacemaker. Not a man, just well, he is a man, but isn't a man at the end of his name. All of these characters are lesser known and even less appreciated usually, but honestly, they all deserve to be hyped for certain reasons. I love characters that are C-listers, in case you didn't know. Kite Man, while an all-around good guy in the animated series, is still considered to be a villain in that animated universe, albeit still a C-list one. And yet this is what makes us love him so much. The fact that he is working hard to try and make a name for himself is kind of a huge part of why I think people just love him. That and the fact that he seems fairly comfortable with who he is, even though he isn't necessarily a top tier villain. And you know, he does know it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't try, and it doesn't mean that he is ashamed of who he is or his, you know, his kite gimmick. He rocks it. Hell yeah, Kite Man. Hell yeah. Number 7. Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror is a staple villain when it comes to the Avengers team, but even still, he's not the first villain I think of when it comes to threats the Avengers might face in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's kind of a weird villain, and he's got a floating chair. It's weird. This is all part of the reason why I was surprised to hear that he was getting a revival, sort of, via the MCU, where he'd appear as a villain in Quantumania. Although even from that point on, I was one of the people speculating that his role in the MCU might be larger than just the Ant-Man and the Wasp film he was slated to star in. Especially when we heard that Jonathan Majors was going to be playing him, I was like, okay. You don't just do that and then make it like a one movie like blip of a villain. And so far it would seem to many others' surprise, I and some others may have been right when it came to our speculation on Kang's role. An alternate version of Kang appeared in Loki known as He Who Remains. This version of Kang warned of many different versions of himself that were basically being held back due to his maintenance and pruning of the sacred timeline. He also warned that killing him would actually cause the timeline to splinter, allowing all these Kangs to have free roam of the multiverse, where many of them were not as chill as he was. And yeah, I don't think they're gonna be as chill. Kang the Conqueror, here we go. Number 6. Pariah. Pariah recently made a surprising comeback in the comics when he destroyed all of the Justice League, or well, like almost all of the Justice League. You've heard of the recent story Death of the Justice League. Well, yeah, that was Pariah. Although Pariah was once a scientist and fairly good man, he was driven mad when he learned that the multiverse was ending during the lead up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, way back in the day. He tried to warn people that it was coming, but people did not want to listen to him. Now, once more, he's in a similar position. In a desperate attempt to prevent another crisis from cyclically destroying everything, this time Dark Crisis, he decided to kill all the heroes, believing that in doing so he would basically prevent the cycle from continuing that would lead to the destruction of the multiverse. It's a pretty crazy idea, but at this point Pariah is a pretty crazy guy. Although it makes sense that he would be part of the catalyst for another crisis, DC fans were still surprised to see him return once more in modern comics. I think we were also all surprised that there's going to be another crisis, considering the last one was called Final Crisis. Not so final, turns out. Number 5. Inheritors. A whole group of villains that I think everyone was fairly surprised to see return again were the Inheritors. This is because the Inheritors were firmly defeated in the previous Spider-Verse event. However, because Spider-Verse was such a massive success, Marvel decided to let the Inheritors return for the next one, Spider-Geddon. And we still have another third chapter of this continuous event headed our way, said to be the end of the Spider-Verse trilogy that will be known as, aptly, the end of the Spider-Verse. At least until we decide to, open that Spider-Verse back up again, because, things end, things are final, and then not so much. I have no doubt that the Spider-Verse will come back eventually. The Inheritors are a group of space energy vampires permanently frozen in time when it comes to their style, stuck in sort of the gothic Victorian era. I love it, but not everybody is here for it. They were defeated and killed at the end of Spider-Verse, but miraculously came back via Superior Spider-Man's tech when he decided to combine their DNA to basically make a clone body for himself should he perish. Using his tech, all the Inheritors were able to return as clones themselves, causing all the spider totems across the multiverse to rejoin once more during Spider-Geddon to take them out again. And then they became little baby versions of themselves, which I love. And also I feel like the Inheritors, baby Inheritors, should get their own book. I said it. Number 4. Flashpoint Joker. The Flashpoint version of Joker is actually Bruce Wayne's mother, Martha Wayne. In the Flashpoint continuity, young Bruce is the one who perished during the mugging as opposed to his parents. Suffering greatly from the loss of their young son, Thomas turned to the path of vengeance, whereas Martha became extremely depressed and ultimately lost her mind, turning to the path of chaos. In the Flashpoint reality and timeline, Thomas becomes Batman and Martha becomes his Joker. Recently in the comics, during Flashpoint Beyond, Flashpoint Joker has made a surprising return, appearing from within the walls of Arkham Asylum. How she got there? Well, we're gonna have to wait and see. What we do know is that she was the one behind the murders of influential characters from the Flashpoint universe. The last we saw of Flashpoint Joker, Martha died drowning in a river, sacrificing herself after learning that in the main continuity, the Joker was the main nemesis to Batman, who in that reality of course was Bruce Wayne, her son, who was alive in that reality. The Flashpoint continuity was reset though recently, with Thomas Wayne's Batman remembering everything that happened previously and trying to solve the mystery of how it all reset. And also solve the mystery of, why all these Flashpoint people were dying. Turned out, it was Martha in the walls of Arkham for some reason. We don't know why. Number 3. Cassandra Nova. Cassandra Nova recently made a comeback in the Marauders series, a surprising one too, when she was needed to help solve a mutant mystery revolving around the existence of the very first mutants, hidden from the Earth mutant history apparently, and then later was invited to join the Marauders team by team leader Captain Kate Pryde. A lot of mysteries needing to be solved, and a lot of surprising villain comebacks in relation to those mysteries. At first I wasn't just startled to see Cassandra Nova, I was downright confused, but I gotta say over the last few issues her return has grown on me, and I'm kind of here for it. I never would have expected to see Cassandra Nova return, definitely not in a heroic sense either, not with a hero team. Krakoa may be for all mutants, but some wouldn't even consider Cassandra to be a mutant, at least not in the traditional sense, because she's a Mumadry, but whatever. She's a mutant, she's part of the crew now, I would say. Number 2. Gaggy. This was one that even caught me by a delightful surprise during the Three Jokers story. While I still am not sure if we know where this story falls in continuity, in or out of continuity, it's still a really awesome read that brought back a villainous sidekick of old that I didn't know how much I really missed until I saw him return. Gaggy is Gagsworth A. Gagsworthy, an old school sidekick of the Jokers from way back in the day, back in the 60s, before he was ever with Harley Quinn. In fact, at one point Gaggy also returned to get revenge on Harley for taking his place at Joker's side, but that happened I believe during Gotham City Sirens, another cool comeback moment for the gangster. In Three Jokers however, Gaggy returns as one of the Three Jokers sidekicks. However, his comeback is short-lived, as he ends up being devoured by a Joker shark. R.I.P. Gaggy. He came back and then he died. Number 1. Raquel. I don't know how we say this name. It's Skrull, so I don't speak Skrull. I'm sorry. Need to learn how to speak Krakoan and Skrull. Got it. Raquel was a really weird comeback, so unexpected that it left everyone who was reading Marvel Comics at the time going, who? Huh? What's happening? Who is that? Even I had to look her up myself. Raquel was Empress of the Skrull Empire, who was believed dead for years. When Galactus came to devour the main homeworld of the Skrull at the time, Tarnax 4, Raquel was believed to have perished with it. However, we later learned during the Empire event a few years ago that she had actually survived survived the death of this world and had been living undercover as the Kree soldier Tanath the Pursuer. Her return was a major surprise to readers because she had been dead since the 80s, so before I was even born. So I was like, who dis? I don't know. So unless you'd been reading comics for that long, or you really knew your Fantastic Four comic book history in terms of what went down back then, you were likely confused by her appearance too. Which is alright, because you know what? We got the internet, and we got piles of comics that we can sift through. Although I think all of us collectively, no matter if we were familiar or not with Raquel, were surprised by her return. Even if you did know who she was, you'd be like, wait, what? I thought she was dead.
Number 10. Herbie the Fat Fury. Who the heck is Herbie the Fat Fury? Yes, exactly. Herbie Popnecker was a dopey, big, lazy, emotionless kid who always looked like he was on the verge of falling asleep, and he was always sucking on lollipops. Now these lollipops were actually part of what made him a superhero, and a pretty powerful one at that. These magical lollipops from the unknown basically allowed him to do anything, but he also had some genetic powers, some of which included heat vision, invisibility, talking to animals, flight, and honestly, through the lollipops, whatever else the story called for. He was known throughout the universe, was irresistible to women, and yet neither of his parents knew he had powers, with his dad even treating him like absolute garbage, which is funny considering his dad was actually the garbage one. This kid was consulted by world leaders, so shut up, Dad. Ugh. Number 9. Kid Eternity. Christopher Kit Freeman was a kid in the DC universe. After his death, it was realized that he actually passed about 75 years before it was actually his time. Because of this, the wizard Shazam fixed the mistake of Mr. Keeper, the one who decides when people die, and decided to bring Christopher back. But as a little oops, sorry for ending your life, Chris learned that he had gained the ability to call on the spirits of the deceased. He says the word eternity and he is transformed into his hero form and can summon the dead as well as gods, mythological, legendary, and even fictional characters, which is really cool. He also has a ghostly form that can go invisible and fly. He has a modern day iteration with similar power set, except he was a coroner and came back to use his powers as a detective, but he really hasn't been featured all too much, and I think this character has some pretty good potential, so let's see it happen, okay? Alright. Cool. Number 8. Night Thrasher. Night Thrasher of Marvel Comics is Dwayne Michael Taylor, and he's basically Batman by any other name. His parents were dispatched right in front of him, he is ultra rich, and he only comes out at night as his name might have suggested. He's also the leader of the New Warriors, which is apparently due for a new series. You may have heard of the New Warriors. They were that group of heroes who basically were the cause of the Stamford, Connecticut incident that caused the Superhuman Registration Act and the Superhuman Civil War. It appeared that Night Thrasher had passed on because of that incident, but that weren't true. He's been around in a very minor aspect since that, and even appeared in a Punisher story in 2019, but as an allegory of Batman, he should be able to do a lot more. Number 7. Brother Power. Brother Power is not truly a living person. No. He came about in the 1960s when a small group of hippies living in an abandoned tailor shop put an old suit on a mannequin, and for some reason, a combination of rain, dust, and the heat from a radiator, plus a lightning strike, brought the mannequin to life with powers including energy absorption, electroblasts, molecular reconstruction, super strength, durability, and object animation. Brother Power defended the hippies from a gang, and they taught Brother Power about music and chemistry. He was also kind of trained to be a pacifist. His last major appearance was back in 2009, and I think he's due for a return. Number 6. Dupe. How often do we get a character like this? I'll tell you, not often. This bumpy looking weird bean thing was the product of a Cold War US military experiment and was instrumental in the fall of the Soviet Union, somehow, but no one ever actually explains that. So that's one reason to bring him back, to explain that. Please. Dupe is unable to learn English, and as such he speaks in a language all of his own that everyone somehow can understand. I'm assuming this is some form of telepathy, I really don't know. But according to Captain America, the US government created him in a secret weapons project. But apparently, he also comes from a place called Marginalia, the world between worlds and a place that begins where the story ends, quote unquote, whatever the hell that means. I couldn't tell you. The most surprising thing is his list of powers. It is long. He has possible omniscience, he's strong and durable enough to defeat Thor, he can heal from super serious wounds in seconds and resurrect himself, he has blinding speed, size alteration, energy projection, psionic fire, blasts, and shields, he can perform dupish magic, and has the power of the funk. Oh, and I almost forgot, Dupe's body contains a nightmare dimension known as Dupe Land, and he is able to access it by turning himself inside out. All of this from a lima bean with arms. Cool. Number 5, Sasquatch. You know, as much as Marvel kind of tries to give Canada their own superhumans, you know, with Wolverine and Alpha Flight, it always feels like we're kind of left at the wayside a little bit. Take Sasquatch for example. He's basically a hairy, less cool Canadian Hulk. After learning of how Banner got turned into the Hulk, Dr. Walter Lankowski began working on his own gamma radiation experiment to make a Hulk, but without having to expose himself to an entire explosion. He turned himself into a massive fur-covered beast and went rampaging until he was helped by Shaman and Snowbird to gain control of his personality and intelligence when in Squatch form. Now, he has a bit more of an involved history than a few characters on this list, especially recently with the Immortal Hulk story. But I still think most people don't think of him when thinking of even Hulk-related heroes, and that needs to change. He's cool, damn it. Number 4, The Max. The Max was a comic by Image Comics, and basically, a social worker named Julie has a very traumatic experience after trying to help a homeless man. Because of that, when she accidentally hits another homeless man with her car, she decides to just cover his body in trash. Now, due to her traumatic experiences, she began taking psychological refuge in an alternate dimension called the Outback inside her own mind. The garbage that she covered the homeless man in touches with this Outback reality, and a purple lampshade expands over the homeless man's body and turns him into this crazy looking purple stinky Pez eating hero. It's kinda nuts. The Max has no idea of his and Julie's connection, but in the Outback world he is her protector, and in the real world he is more of a homeless vagrant still. His only real power is crazy super strength, but I think it's a really crazy concept that could use more exploring. Number 3, The Question. DC Comics is full of detective-like mysterious characters, but what better mysterious character to talk about than The Question. Specifically, I want to talk about Renee Montoya, who took over after Vic Sage, who passed away during the events of 52. Question has a vendetta against the religion of crime, and she is an ally to Batman. Neither she or her mentor had any real powers. They were both just skilled detectives, and they wore a mask made of a skin-like material called pseudoderm, which basically made them look like they had no facial features. So like no mouth, no nose, no eyes, no eyebrows, no ears, nothing. Honestly, kind of terrifying, but hey, who am I to judge? Renee as Question hasn't really been doing much recently, and honestly her mentor was a bit more interesting, having a whole philosophical crisis and all that. But I'll be damned if they aren't a cool and interesting looking character who I want to see more of. Number 2, Freakazoid. Have you ever watched this show? Such an utterly bizarre character, and it came around when I honestly think superhero cartoons were at their greatest. His powers included the ability to have all the knowledge of the internet, which honestly explains why he is literally insane. He is also super strong in varying degrees, and he has moved at the speed of light. But honestly, he has the way better power of cartoon physics, which is an easy way of saying he can break the laws of physics and reality, honestly, in hilarious ways to defeat enemies and just mess with people. He also seems to be aware he isn't a cartoon because he breaks the fourth wall all the time. The show has been gone for a while, and part of me really wants a comeback, while another part of me thinks modern showmakers would kind of just ruin it. What do you think? And coming in at number 1, it's Matter Eater Lad. When an alien race has all their food infected by microbes, they evolve to be able to eat unlimited amounts of any other form of matter to survive instead. Naturally. This alien race are native to the planet Bismol, and this is where Legion of Superheroes member Tenzil Kem, better known as Matter Eater Lad, hails from. The 15th member to join the Legion, Matter Eater Lad has an ability you just wouldn't think would be useful. but you would be wrong. Like, imagine you get stuck inside somewhere. He could eat a way out for you guys. Imagine a giant asteroid was on its way to Earth. He could eat that. Imagine someone fires an energy blast at you. He could intercept it with his mouth and eat that. He can eat through literally anything due to his digestive enzymes that he and everyone of his race produces. Thanks to comic books, this ability has become more and more useful in very random ways. For example, Bismalians don't possess any other superpowers, really, but the ability to eat tons and tons of anything and digest it in literally seconds apparently translates into food energy that can give them super speed, as an example. He is utterly ridiculous and kind of disturbing, but with him being mentioned in Peacemaker, the show, I think it's time for a comeback.
At number 10 is Tigra, first appearing in her own Marvel comic book called The Cat in 1972. This superhero just doesn't get the spotlight very often. Considering she has been a member of the Avengers in the past, it would only make sense that she might appear more prominently in more recent issues, or even MCU movies. But sadly, her most recent appearance was in a supporting role in Avengers Academy between issues 1 and 39. Tigra's powers began as an experiment by Dr. Joanne Tumalo, who gave her powers attached to her costume, and in this form she was simply known as the Cat. But down the line is when she eventually mutated into Tigra, a human-tiger hybrid, through a mystical ritual. She was then bound to a race of humanoid cat people from the Middle Ages, which she could then transform into on command from her human form, using the cat's head amulet. She's a pretty cool hero, so I wonder why they haven't really brought her back in any big way. Maybe they found her too similar to DC's Catwoman, who knows. Next up at number 9 is Stingray, an oceanographer turned superhero who builds his suit in order to explore the depths of the ocean. He helps construct an underwater city covered by a glass dome which he uses to try and grow food for mankind. He first appears in Tales to Astonish number 95 in June of 1967, so he's just on the cusp of the golden age. Just about. This guy is no doubt an older Marvel creation, and if you haven't heard of him, you may not be alone. Although he has appeared as recently as the Iron Man 2020 event, he still only appears briefly as a side character facing off against Captain Barracuda. But at least the writers of that issue probably had the same thought as me, that he deserves to come around again. Once again, my hunch is that he's just a little too similar to DC's Aquaman, which might keep Marvel from giving him any more spotlight than they already have in more modern issues. Although his buddy Namor the Submariner, looks like a carbon copy of Aquaman. But Namor appeared for the first time in Marvel's first ever comic book, Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939, whereas Aquaman didn't appear until 1941. But I digress. It just seems that DC found a way to occupy the underwater superhero market, which keeps us from seeing more characters like Stingray and even Namor more often. At number 8, we have DC's The Question, or just Question. Like Stingray, this superhero first appeared in 1967, but isn't showcased very much anymore. Usually teaming up with the Blue Beetle, this superhero got his last solo series in 1987, lasting 36 issues. He originally had the secret identity of Vic Sage, but was later reimagined in the 2006-2007 miniseries 52, and his protege, Renee Montoya, takes over the mantle. This character is just a good old-fashioned fighter, only really having abilities in martial arts and I guess sleuthing since he's a journalist by trade, but he's just got such a simple and cool film noir kind of look, and it would be cool to see him in a lead role again. Again though, his abilities and look are strikingly similar to Marvel's Chameleon, so maybe by holding back on popularizing this character too much, they're just avoiding butting heads with their competitors. Once again, it's hard to tell. Okay, at number 7, we've got Marvel's Dominic Fortune, or Dominic Fortunov. This character is not only old in terms of his first appearance in the comics, but the character himself is aged to the point where it's known to be one of his biggest weaknesses. First appearing in Marvel Preview number 2 in 1975, this superhero needs a comeback for the sole reason that he's just a guy. He doesn't have any powers, but fought in World War II and always seems to be getting caught up in assassination attempts and weird odd jobs. Like one time when he had to babysit 3 drunken actors in Hollywood for a weekend and had to call the cops on them after things got out of hand. You know, and after that, Fortune actually gets recruited to the Avengers by Nick Fury in 1959. He's just a good old-fashioned human superhero who runs into human troubles and stays in his lane, but ends up getting the opportunity still to support the superpowered Avengers with bazooka blasts and covert ops. At number 6, we have DC's Dr. Fate. This guy is old. He first appeared in More Fun Comics number 55 in 1940 and basically hasn't been mentioned again since his death in the Book of Fate number 1 in 1997. So yes, that's a long run. but still I'd like to see more of him. Dr. Fate is a superhero that's got so much going on and looks so cool that I don't know why he isn't used more often these days. His powers come from an incident when he, Kent Nelson, and his father were uncovering the tomb of ancient immortal Nabu, and Kent is basically trained by the ancient being and awarded with the amulet of Nabu, a cloak, and a helmet. With the training and these items in his control, he has abilities ranging from magic manipulation and flight to invisibility, super strength, and resurrection, among others. It's just a really cool character based on real ancient myth, and I don't see any reason why Dr. Fate shouldn't have another comeback soon. Okay, number 5, Marvel's Gargoyle. This superhero first appeared in Defenders issue number 94 in 1981, but since then he's actually retired and settled down in Greenwich Village. He even opened a restaurant called Isaac's Oysters. But he did go for one more rip for old time's sake, aiding Iron Man on a mission to take down the android Korvac. But that's sort of been it for him. And what's cool about this superhero is that he was sort of meant to be evil, but just chose good. He was formed when Isaac Christians agreed to place his soul inside a cursed gargoyle and do the bidding of the six-fingered hand. This was all in exchange for his issues to be resolved. But then, when he was tasked with capturing Hellcat, a member of the Defenders, he couldn't get himself to do it, and defied the six-finger hand, and just sort of kept living on as this like possessed gargoyle who chose good. He kind of reminds me of Beast. He just has this super wholesome energy to him, and I just feel like he could do for more of that sweet, sweet limelight. At number 4, we have Zeta from Batman Beyond, and eventually the Zeta Project cartoon spin-off. The show ran from 2001 to 2002 as part of a spin-off to the Batman Beyond episode Zeta. This character is so wholesome and doesn't get enough attention, having been last seen 20 years ago in what would have been the final episode of the short-running series. This synthoid was built for the NSA to keep an eye on terrorist organizations, so his abilities are pretty extensive, being able to shapeshift into just about anyone to infiltrate and carry out covert ops with ease. He's a naive and friendly character who decides to go rogue after realizing that any one of his assassination targets could be innocent. Zeta had such a moment and clearly a huge approval rating since his one episode got him a whole series, but at a certain point, the world forgot about such a good and powerful synthoid superhero that definitely deserves a comeback. At number 3, there's Warlord, a character the world hasn't seen since his death in Warlord Volume 4, Issue 12. But there should be some kind of revival of Travis Morgan, who is another character on the list who doesn't actually have any powers, but is just a very well-respected and decorated war veteran. He also looks a lot like Oliver Queen or Green Arrow, which could have had something to do with it. They sort of acknowledge this when they finally meet in the same comic, and all of the Seattle underworld mistake Warlord for Green Arrow and attack him on sight. But whatever the reason is, Warlord's legacy deserves to be acknowledged with another appearance of some kind. I mean, the lore behind the character is that in past lives he's been Sir Lancelot, D'Artagnan of the Three Musketeers, and Crazy Horse, among other legendary warriors and soldiers. He's just a great human character with, might I add, a really cool costume and some badass accolades to boot. Bring him back. Okay, at number 2 on the list, we've got Komodo. This superhero really was a flash in the pan, only appearing on and off for a few years and having her legacy end with her powers being stripped for a time until they're restored again by Cloud9 and Hardball, but that's sort of it. And I think the last time she's been seen is in the Fear Itself storyline, which wrapped up in 2011, which is 11 years ago now, believe it or not. But this character needs to reappear in some way. The superhero was first created because Melody Kusama lost her leg in a serious car accident, and none other than Dr. Connors from, yes, the Spider-Man series, decides to endow her with the regenerative powers of a lizard. Well, not only that, of course, she actually turns into a lizard fully and at will and gains super strength, speed, agility, stamina, all that good stuff. I think this story is a good one to retell because who doesn't love a good story where someone confined to a wheelchair is able to not only walk again, but fight crime and be pretty damn good at it. Okay, last on the list is just my personal favorite, arguably obscure superhero 3D Man. An athlete turned superhero, 3D Man mysteriously gained superpowers after being stripped of his 3 Olympic gold medals. I mean, he was taking steroids, but there's always room for redemption, right? This character first appeared in 1998 and no one ever really talks about him. And to be honest, I didn't even know he existed existed until I started writing this list. And I want this hero to get more spotlight primarily because I'm a sucker for early 2000s culture, and this character is just such a great time capsule for that period, where everybody was obsessed with 3D for some reason, with DVDs coming with 3D glasses in the case, remember that? And 3D Man has the same nostalgic look to him, with many of his appearances being colored in green and red. If you want to look him up yourself, you'll notice that he originally went by the name of Triathlon and later changed to 3D Man during the Secret Invasion storyline. This guy just looks so cool and hits home with some good nostalgia for me, as well as probably anyone from the Gen Z or millennial generations. And there's also just a silly factor there too. 3D Man needs to come back. Please, can we? Just for 1 second.
Number 10, Hawkeye. Ultimate Hawkeye first appeared in Ultimate issue 7, and he doesn't mind going for the kill this time around. He was a SHIELD agent who wasn't as fancy when it came to arrows. He's just more military this time around. It's actually pretty dark at times. He became a super soldier once briefly when the Avengers were put on the USS Jimmy Carter. They got captured, and then Hawkeye and a few others ingested super soldier serum, and then they rescued Nick Fury. Hawkeye is a pretty sweet agent. He's badass, he gets it done. But his family life and dynamic with Black Widow this time around is much different than most would think. When a team of mercenaries broke into Clint's house early on, they took out his wife and kids, which is awful. But it gets even worse when you find out that Black Widow was the leader of said mercenary team. And then Hawkeye gets even in a pretty gruesome way. 3 arrows, perfectly placed. Gory. Pretty gory, very gory. Number 9, Nick Fury. When he entered the Ultimates and Marvel Team Up issue 5, Nick Fury would soon take over as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. And his first plan was to bring back the Super Soldier program, which actually resulted in the creation of Ultimate Captain America and Ultimate Hulk, etc. His origins are pretty unique. I mean, he fought for the US in World War II, and tragically he was taken by force to be the next test subject for Project Rebirth. When he was injected with this new serum, it gave him super strength, and in turn, he freed himself and other prisoners and busted out of there. So now he's got quite the power behind those punches, and Ultimate Nick Fury is way cooler than our 616 Nick Fury because he was designed to look like Samuel L. Jackson, so it's really no contest. And before we continue on with this list of Ultimate heroes, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It really does help our channel out a lot. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Let's go right back into this list. Thank you so much. Number 8, Nightcrawler. Kurt Wagner made his Ultimate debut in Ultimate X-Men issue 7. Now his origins here had him growing up in the Weapon X program, and he was trained to become an assassin from the start. He had a pretty dark upbringing, and in turn he would have these bad pockets with the X-Men. Like Warren and Dazzler were a couple, but Kurt also liked Dazzler, so he kidnapped her? Okay. And the team was like, hey, so we're gonna put you in a coma now because that's not cool. We can't really do that. And then he came back and he apologized. The dust was settled, no hard feelings. Okay, sure. He joined Colossus' X-Men team with Dazzler and Angel, by the way, so it was definitely fine. Kurt wasn't all bad. He was actually kind of funny, I mean, as a character, because sometimes he would use the Danger Room with Angel to reenact Pirates of the Caribbean instead of, you know, fighting bad guys. So already this version is my kind of guy. I mean, minus the kidnapping part, of course. Him and Angel were tight because they couldn't hide their mutations, so they ended up being best of friends. So they fought pirates together, chased the same girls, they're living the mutant dream in a way. Not bad. Sadly, Kurt was killed by Magneto's ultimatum wave, and it got a lot of other X-Men killed as well. So it's dark, it's nice, and then it's dark. That's the Ultimates. Number 7, the Hulk. First appearing in Ultimate Marvel Team Up issue 2, he's still big, he's still angry, but this time around he is gray. Okay. Now before this, however, Bruce Banner wanted to be just like Captain America, back before he was the Hulk, back before he was big and strong. So at Cambridge University, he was committed to duplicating the Super Soldier Serum with helps of Nick Fury's Super Soldier blood. So he used it on himself, and honestly, already I'm a fan of Bruce Banner more. I mean, the Hulk hasn't even been created yet, and then Nick Fury, the first Super Soldier, gathered the best genetic engineers to recreate the serum, and Bruce was luckily amongst them. So Bruce actually thought that he figured this thing out, but again, he wanted to be like Cap and he wanted to stay quiet, so he tested this new serum out on himself, and then he ended up becoming Ultimate Hulk. Later on, Bruce decided to make even more serum, so he mixed Super Soldier Serum again with this new Hulk serum, smashed them together, injected himself, so now Super Soldier Nick Fury actually made Banner the Hulk in this timeline. That's a cool sentence right there. Number 6. Deadpool. Meet Wade Wilson. He had a pretty rough go in the Ultimates, as do most of them. I'd say more intense than his 616 counterpart, because in Ultimate Spider-Man, Wilson gets hired by the Ganosian government, but of course in Deadpool's spirit, he gets hired to double down and hunt these mutants, but it's also a TV event. It's fun. And then when Deadpool is going up against Spider-Man, he actually gets unmasked. And his appearance is even more shocking in this reality. Even the host has to apologize to the viewers at home because his mask, I mean, to begin with, wasn't even really a mask. It's translucent, so not really the best. And then Spider-Man even adds insult to injury, saying that his face smells like a KFC dumpster on a hot day. So if anybody needs redemption, it's definitely Wade Wilson from the Ultimates. Number 5, Juggernaut. The first time we see him, it's very clear that he's more powerful. Something is up with this X-Men. He looked like a future version of the Juggernaut. It was pretty intimidating. Now he looks like an evil stripper from the future, which is, honestly, I like it. It's cool. He was a genius in this universe as well. I mean, literally, the guy was super smart. He grew up in the same trailer park as Rogue, and he still considered himself trailer trash, although he was one of the smartest people alive. Guys, never doubt yourself. Things took a turn when he was taken by Weapon X and forced to be this living weapon of mass destruction. Then following the orders of Colonel John Wraith, he was part of their strike force that took out the X-Men, or even worse, forced the X-Men into Weapon X, which we heard plenty of early on in this list. He walked tall and mighty until he got taken out in the dumbest way possible. Like the Juggernaut, this makes me upset. He for sure needs a redemption, that's all I'm saying. Even when he's fighting Rogue later on, he still wants them to be happy and in love. He still wants that dream, so he's still a good guy deep down. And then Ultimate X-Men issue 99, in the middle of a fight, he gets taken down because of a poisonous dart. A dart. Yeah, just one of those. That's it. The Juggernaut got taken out by a dart. It went right through his visor gap. I mean, amazing aim, but come on. This is the same guy that dropped a building on Gambit? Number 4, Mr. Fantastic. Reed Richards needs a redemption on screen before anything else. I mean, the last Fantastic Four movie, I mean, if you haven't watched it, honestly, don't. Marvel's redoing them soon. You might as well just wait it out. In the Ultimate version, it was dark, and he was younger, and honestly, he was cooler. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four issue 1, and even at the start of Ultimatum, when that big wave hit, Sue bites the bullet, and he didn't waste any time. He's not happy. He immediately blames Namor, and by blaming, I mean he knocks him out first and then asks questions later. Okay, Reed, chill. Eventually, he becomes a villain in this universe, referring to himself as the Maker, and caused some trouble in the 616 universe as well, after his universe was destroyed. Now, this is the Mr. Fantastic that we need. This guy gets the job done. He's scary. Number 3, Wolverine. Making his first appearance in Ultimate X-Men issue 1, he didn't remember his past, and he thinks that he was once married. He has a ring, and he thinks Sabretooth killed his family. It's all a blur. Stressful. No thanks to Weapon X. Now, Ultimate James Howlett is actually the first mutant, and it turns out that this time around, you can kill Wolverine. You just have to rip his bones out that happen to have adamantium built into it. That ought to do it. Also, so painful. This all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event, and Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outward like water bursting through a dam. There's a nice picture for you. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I don't know what is. Number 2, Thor. Making his first entry in the Ultimates with issue 4, Thor Odinson actually looks a lot like our current MCU Thor, and I think he might have more in common than we think. For starters, the Ultimate Thor needs a magic belt to have powers, and in Spider-Man Homecoming, Happy mentions Thor's magic belt and all the stuff that they're packing up on Moving Day. So Thor just might need this come Love and Thunder, but in the comics, Loki was convincing everybody that Thor is just an insane dude with a magic belt. And they kind of bought it. What happens was he wasn't worthy yet, so he got his ass kicked, and then finally in Ultimates 2, issue 12, he gets his powers back. But the fact that this Thor went through all that to begin with, so sad. Definitely so sad. Number 1, Quicksilver. Okay, yeah, he's in love with his sister in the Ultimates, and it's weird, and it's gross. Yeah, sure. But this Quicksilver otherwise was far more superior. He was faster in the Ultimate Universe, he was supersonic when it comes to speeds. He almost reached the speed of light at one point, like, come on, dude. And as long as he's still alive, he can always re-heal himself. In Ultimate Wolverine issue 3, Pietro grabs Logan and runs with him. He was actually trying to tear the flesh off him, and if it was anybody else but Wolverine, it probably would have worked. And in Ultimate Comics 29, he heals himself using his super fast metabolism, and he uses his super speed to study Reed Richards' notes. He says he's not smart, but he is fast, so he ran the math nearly 100,000 times. That's insane. Quicksilver needs a comeback for sure, more so on screen than I think any superhero right now. Hashtag Ralph Boner. Kicking off the list at number 10, Vampire King. If there's one thing we need, it's more Vampire Hulk. I mean, right? That's what you were just thinking of. Also, scariest thing you can imagine, easily. He made his first debut in Ultimate Comics Avengers issue 3, and at first he was actually Nerd Hulk, which we see in the MCU right now. God, I hope he doesn't turn into a vampire. Or maybe I do, I don't know. Now, he was a clone of the Hulk that Captain America could take down, so he was smart, but he couldn't win a physical fight. So the Avengers kinda kicked him out. They're like, great, you're smart, but you can't punch, so beat it, pal. Rude. But that's when the next version of Nerd Hulk came to be. He was bitten by a vampire and took over an entire vampire horde. Now, the solution to a vampire Hulk was easier than we might have thought. Just teleport him into sunlight. And that's exactly what happened in Ultimate Avengers 18. We definitely need this guy to come back, especially now, post-COVID. He'd make a mark. Number 9, the Magician. A magician, the Magician. Who is he? The first Ultimate X-Men character that doesn't actually have a counterpart. So the Magician is OG in the Ultimates. Meet Elliot Boggs. He made his grand entrance in Ultimate X-Men issue 66, created by Robert Kirkman and Tom Rainey. Now, he was always dedicated to protect humanity, which is a great thing in a superhero. We want that. But when his powers came to be, the police thought that Elliot was the cause of his parents' death. Rightfully so. I mean, this guy can warp reality, but he can't even control it. So you don't really want to be around him, but you kind of want to be around him. He was able to create people, which is a pretty amazing ability. Dangerous, but amazing. So he worked with the X-Men for a bit, and then he worked with the Academy of Tomorrow for a bit, and then Nick Fury secretly talked to Xavier in hopes to get the Magician into S.H.I.E.L.D. custody. Now, the team attacked Elliot after some drama. They thought it was a threat, so he just created more villains. He just created more instances of Multiple Man, Blob, and Toad from the Brotherhood to attack. And Wolverine finished the kid off with his claws to the chestal plate, and it turns out that was just a manifestation, and Elliot was actually still alive. He just needs to disappear to work on his power. Fair. Where are you now? Is it good? Come back. I don't know. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It's really helpful for our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your constant support. Let's get right back into this list. Number 8, a Teen Mutant. This next one is a one-off. He doesn't have a name, so we're just going to refer to him as Teen Mutant for now. He doesn't last too long. Now, at first, he looks like a regular kid. There's posters on his wall. He's got Wolverine on his wall, which is cool. He reminds me of me a little bit, you know, and the caption says be different. So he took that advice maybe a little bit too far. So he wakes up, he's ready for school, he's looking for breakfast, and his mother is just nowhere to be seen. Only a pile of her clothes remains on the ground. So he calls the cops. Just kidding, he didn't do that. He just went to school after leaving a note. Don't do this, kids. Don't do that at all. On the way there, he sees a collar on the ground, again by itself, just clothing laid on the sidewalk. What's going on? Now finally, he sees people, so he's not going crazy, which is a relief, but I bet he wishes that he was crazy, because he had this neat ability where people just don't survive being close to him. He hears it from the guy in the poster, Wolverine himself, when he finds him ducking out in a cave. So what happened was, when he hit puberty, this teen, he developed a specific mutation that radiates a series of toxins and acid-like poisons, which wipes out any organic tissue and just turns it into vapor, turns it into mist. The number of the day that he ended up taking out just because he hit puberty was 265. And I thought pimples were bad. Number 7, Silver Searcher. So the name is a little different for Norrin Radd in the Ultimates. He made his first debut in Ultimate Fantastic 4 issue 42. He was teleported to Earth after Reed Richards mistook him for a star that he wanted to harness. So he brought him here. Awesome, it wasn't his fault. So naturally the world was also in chaos because of his arrival. But Norrin said that he would summon his master who would make the population of Earth happier than they've ever been. Fresh water for all, free phone plans, taxing the rich? What is this plan, sir? The Searcher's master was Zenla's ruler at the time. Revka Termaloon Edifax Skyros III. Rolls off the tongue nice and easy, cool. Also known as the king without enemies. Let's just go with that. So this king would use mind control, that's the trick here, to get mind control and get these humans to worship them. So after Psycho Man took over the Earth, Silver Searcher rescued Mr. Fantastic and asked him to save the planet. Now the Searcher helped the Fantastic Four afterwards and then continued wandering the depths of space. Now we love to see a betrayal, especially when it's for the good side, you know? Norrin is great, and in the Ultimates he is immortal and he's powerful enough to go against the Phoenix, so yeah, we need more of them. Number 6, Loki. Making his first appearance in the Ultimates 2 issue 1, Loki Odinson was much more powerful here. He has the ability to shuffle time and space, as Thor simply puts it. In the beginning, Loki would fight alongside Thor and Balder. They were the Warriors 3. Now his mother was a prisoner of Odin and asked him to bring her the Norn stones, but while he was stealing them, he took out his brother Balder and of course was banished to Asgard afterwards. Now Loki can literally warp reality in the Ultimates. He can retcon history into anything he wanted to. He could create these events that just never happened, until he was depowered by Odin, of course. Now even after he was depowered, he was still able to put up quite a fight as our normal Loki. Now I want to see more Warriors 3 with them. Like, I would watch a show with just those 3 any day. It's probably gonna come, realistically, at this rate the Marvel's going at. Number 5. Iron Man. Making his first appearance in Ultimate Marvel Team Up issue 4, Ultimate Iron Man has some medical issues as well, but it's much more bizarre this time around. It's not his heart that makes him unique, it's actually his brain. Now he was born a genius, of course, and he was also one of 2 twin boys, the other being Gregory Stark. Now Tony originally wanted to start his own business with his current girlfriend Josie Gardner, but after so much pressure from his father, he decided to join the family business, and Josie ended up leaving Tony because of this. She was like, oh, I thought we had a thing? Okay, see ya. Then 6 months later, Josie tragically passed away in a plane crash. Now the plane crash was orchestrated by Mandarin International, which was a company that used to work with Howard Stark earlier, but cut ties. Drama. So Howard wanted Tony to put all that pain into work for the company, but Tony was like, you know what, I think nanotechnology is where I'm gonna put that energy. So after his father's passing, Tony then had to fully take over the company. But by then he was a troubled celebrity, he was an alcoholic, and things got even harder for Tony when he was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. So he mixed his biotech with armor and he bought himself some time. Now Ultimate Tony Stark's tumor was actually an Infinity Stone growing in his brain. So with the nanotech body and everything, it just made him stronger, so much stronger. So this gave Tony the ability to transfer his consciousness between other machines. He's actually friends with his brain tumor in this world. His name is actually Anthony. It's a little boy. It's like a separate living hallucination boy. Totally normal. Number 4. Colossus. Making his first appearance in the 1610 universe with Ultimate X-Men issue 1, Peter Rasputin aka Colossus was discovered during the Cold War. He was attacked by Anatol Spichkin, but when it was confirmed that Peter was indeed a mutant, a deal was made instead. Anatol would keep his secret and he was so ready to give Peter a job, but down the road, if he ever needed one, he had a job for him down the road. Of course, he was a giant guy made of metal. He's like, hey, I got some for you to do, trust me. Roofing, stapling, some hammering, we can find you some things. Peter's father, like most fathers in these comics, was not a pleasant man, so Peter thought, you know what, I could use some of that help now, let's go. And then he went back to Anatol because the thing is, Ultimate Colossus had thick skin, literally he was made of steel, but he wasn't strong enough where it really made a huge difference. I mean, sure, drywall is easier to punch through, but it was heavy. Like, imagine wearing a skin suit of metal. The Tin Man probably had insane calves, but it wasn't until Anatol introduced Peter to this drug called Banshee, and that's where he got the strength behind those metal mitts. So now Colossus, on narcotics, was taking on these jobs, these super strong tourist gigs, and at the age of 19, Peter was picked up from Big Boris, a Russian mafia boss, and then he worked with him for 10 years. So he just joined the mafia for 10 years from 19 to 29. You know, the usual thing you do after you're 19. He kept his powers a secret mostly for those around him, and then one day during a botched arm deal, Peter and his team were shot at. Peter survived because of his thick skin, and his mutant ability was also exposed in a much greater way. He was kind of screwed until Jean Grey found him and then offered him a spot with the X-Men. That's actually where you got the codename Colossus. Now this version is unreal. He's close with Wolverine as they both share, you know, horrible backgrounds. They would walk the streets at night just trying to solve these dark cases, looking for trouble. Imagine these two bumping into you. No chance. In Ultimate War, he took on Thor and Iron Man at the same time for 10 minutes. So, how wild is that? Number 3, Ultimate Red Skull. Making his debut in the Ultimate Comics Avengers 1 back in 2009, Ultimate Red Skull is, I know, a villain, but he wasn't always that way. He's a lot different than the Red Skull that we know from our main continuity. He's actually the son of Steve Rogers in this universe and Gail Richards. They even hid him and trained him to become the next Captain America. The Ultimates are wild. This is the dream scenario. But he always feared that he would never live up to his father's expectations. Now, it's not like he was raised in a bad household, it was kind of the opposite. opposite. He was raised to become a superhero. He was raised to fill some rather big boots. He was raised to become the next Captain America after he was declared dead in Iceland. So he kind of had the dream job, and he was more powerful than Steve Rogers as well. So what happened? So when we're talking about comebacks, I really think Ultimate Red Skull could have been a treat. Now, he was eventually in charge of the military that he grew up with. He figured out now that he was a leader, and he used it against them. His personality as well was pretty easygoing, so it wasn't hard to convince anybody what he was doing. But again, he had this mental wall where he could never live up to Father Rogers. So at age 17, he escaped and took out every doctor and soldier on that team. He just wiped everybody out. So evil. And then he used a kitchen knife to really complete the whole Red Skull look. A nice do-it-yourself makeover. Nice and haunting. So he had all the tools to be great, but that pressure of Steve Rogers took him down the wrong path. Interesting. Number 2, Magneto. He made his first appearance in Ultimate X-Men issue 1. Eric Lenscher was born to 2 Canadian agents of Weapon X. Now, he got his abilities and mastered magnetism at a young age, and his father didn't respond well to that. He was intoxicated most of the time, and he attacked Eric one day. Not an ideal living situation for a child. Now, he tried to shoot Eric once, but those powers naturally came out, and then Eric pushed the bullet right back. So Eric had to spend his teen years with that guilt weighing down on him. Now, eventually he was disgusted with Weapon X, the whole idea of finding a cure for the mutant gene through means of. So he used these abilities, freed Mutant X, Wolverine, who I talked about in part 1 of this list, which you for sure watched. And then Eric married a human woman named Isabel, but he left her once he met Charles Xavier. They didn't fall in love. He was fascinated. This is the first adult mutant that he's ever met, and they share the same ideologies on them. So Eric grabbed these mutant kids from a previous lover, and then denied ever loving a human woman. Rough. The Brotherhood relocated to the Savage Land a few years later, and then Eric started referring to the mutants as an army, which is bad news. He was changing, as were his views on this whole mutant operation. He even started going by the name Magneto, and totally abandoned his human name, and then Xavier was no longer on board. I mean, this is Supervillain 101. Anybody can see a villain in the making, especially if you can read minds. That sure does help. So Magneto made a helmet that prevented that from ever happening. This helmet prevented psi intrusion into his mind, and it also looked cool. So when Charles took a few loyal followers and made a run for it, Magneto was pretty upset and broke Charles' spine, leaving him in the wheelchair. And finally, number 1, we have Miles Morales. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fallout issue 4, just a couple months before the death of Peter Parker. Now, Norman Osborn was arrested and revealed as the Green Goblin, and then a young thief broke into that empty Osborn industry, and then that's where a genetically enhanced spider found its way into the thief's backpack. Now, while Miles Morales was visiting his Uncle Aaron, that spider just happened to crawl out of Uncle Aaron's bag, and then it bit Miles Morales. He of course got these amazing abilities, the Spider-Man abilities, but on top of that, he could also turn invisible, which is a pretty sweet gig. That plus Stun Blast makes Miles pretty hard to take down. Now the thing is, what makes him unique is at first, Miles didn't really want to be a hero. He wanted to leave that up to the real Spider-Man until his untimely departure, saving his family from Osborn. So Miles got to the scene, but it was too late and too ahead of him. So he felt guilt after this for not being able to save Peter, so he suited up and joined the battle. His first villain was against Kangaroo, and he took him on wearing a Spider-Man Halloween costume, which is a great look. I honestly love Miles. I'm so happy he's in a bigger part of the Spider-Verse that we're currently in, and I'm betting that we meet live-action Miles Morales in the next Spider-Man movie. I think that's the only thing they've managed to keep a secret about that film. I'm calling it now.
Number 10, Goblin. Goblin was a pretty interesting and unique mutant who first appeared in the pages of Alpha Flight in issue 48 back in 1987. Goblin is the twin sister of Pathway, Laura Dean. Both siblings had been members of Alpha Flight in the past, as well as Beta Flight and Gamma Flight. While Goblin was in her mother's womb, they actually sensed early on that she was a mutant because of her unusually goblin-like appearance. Her parents wanted to abort her because of this, so her sister, Laura, who was in there with her instinctively, used her own mutant powers to teleport Goblin to Live World for her safety. For a long time, people actually thought Goblin was Pathway, and that Laura could actually just transform into Goblin. Eventually, Laura and Goblin, as well as everyone else, would learn the truth about their relation to one another, and their swapping of places throughout Laura's life. Goblin and Pathway have both not been seen for years since they left Department H. Goblin's mutation has resulted in her being super agile, possessing a unique appearance, and having a slight healing factor. It'd be cool to see, I think, both Goblin and Pathway return. They've been gone for so long. What are they up to? Where'd they go? Guess they're just roaming around in Canada? Number 9, Hijack. David Bond is a mutant that I personally quite enjoyed having in the comics, but who I don't think we've seen for a few years now, unless I completely missed him popping up on Krakoa somewhere. I don't think he's even been spotted there just yet, like not even in the background that I can recall. Though we have gotten a few technology-based mutants such as Sage, Trinary, and Warlock back as major characters, Hijack still remains somewhat forgotten to the sands of time. Where did he go? David Bond is a technopath who is able to command and control all kinds of vehicles, more often cars, but we've also seen him take control of the SHIELD helicarrier and Sentinels before besides. One of the helicarriers anyways. Number 8. Copycat. Copycat is someone whose real name you might recognize thanks to the Deadpool films. Vanessa Carlyle is her name, and while we got a version of her in the films who is Deadpool's love interest, which also happens in the comics, the cinematic version of Vanessa is pretty different from her comic book counterpart, who I might add also has now been permadead for years. Copycat in the comics is a mutant who has powers similar to Mystique's, except her powers can't be used as creatively as Mystique has used hers in the past. Remember when Mystique turned into paper? That's what I'm talking about. Copycat's powers allow her to impersonate and shapeshift into other humanoid beings, even copying their powers if they have any. At least we've seen that happen before. Her powers also make her impersonations so good that even those closest to the person would be fooled by them. In theory. With mutants able to return, it would be interesting to see how Deadpool and Copycat might interact in the future if she was to be resurrected. And she's a mutant, so could happen. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn more about some forgotten mutants, you want to reminisce and look back, be sure to let us know in the comments below. Give this video a like. Honestly, I have so many more mutants that I want to talk to you about, so it's a gift for you and a gift for me when you do that. Number 7. Forget-Me-Not. I don't think this list would be complete without Forget-Me-Not. This mutant's real name remains unknown, likely because of how his powers work. Forget-Me-Not's mutant power is that he is basically undetectable. No one, even people who have met and know him, is able to remember his existence. This makes him hard to even notice in a room, and Professor X himself had to actually set a mental alarm clock reminder like every little while in order to keep Forget-Me-Not in his mind. In the end, Forget-Me-Not was literally forgotten by all the mutants, and we haven't really seen or remembered him in a long time. He was spotted, however, momentarily in issue 9 of X Factor for those that were really keeping an eye out for him, but that was only in the corner and background of one single panel as far as I know. So I don't know if we can classify that as any major return for this character, who still seems to have gone unspotted by some and definitely seems to remain forgotten. Sadly. Number 6. Gentle. Gentle is a mutant from the nation of Wakanda. He made his first appearance in the 2004 series New X-Men in issue 23. Nesno Abidemi had it rough when he was younger, as his father was Russian and his mother Wakandan, which meant he grew up always being treated and feeling like an outsider. His power grants him superhuman strength as his muscles can rapidly expand in size, making him super strong, but also at the cost of being in immense pain, both physically from the expansion and due to psychological trauma that he carries with him from his past. Because of this, Gentle is covered in unique and iconic vibranium tattoos, which help with the pain and also help him to better control his powers, preventing him from overexerting himself and potentially dying while using them. Gentle is a really cool character, and although you may have spotted him partying it up on Krakoa, he hasn't been given much to do as a key player in any of the current X books just yet. Number 5. Bandera. As someone who is currently reading the original run of Wolverine, I can't in good conscience create this list and leave out La Bandera, a favorite supporting character and mutant of mine from that series. La Bandera made her first appearance in the 80s Wolverine series in issue 19. Bandera went on an adventure with Wolverine where she helped him put a stop to the tyrannical and militaristic rule of President Caradid in Tierra Verde, also helping Wolverine to defeat an ancient monster that Caradid had unleashed known as Spore. In the end, she stayed behind in Tierra Verde to help the people there transition to a more democratic form of government. She wouldn't even get to remain alive for a decade in the comics, being killed off in the mid-90s in an issue of Captain America. The island of Krakoa and the planet Mars are now where mutants call home, and resurrection protocols are in place to bring all fallen and lost mutants back, but we still haven't spotted Bandera yet for some reason. Where's she at, the 5? Bring her back! I'm looking at you, all 5 of you mutants that are resurrecting everyone. Get to it. Chop chop. Number 4. Mimic. Mimic started off as an iconic mutant villain when he first appeared in X-Men issue 19. He has resurfaced in the comics on more than one occasion and was mentioned, but we haven't seen what he's been up to lately on the mutant island nation Krakoa. All that we know is he's probably there doing something? Mimic's powers allow him to copy the powers and skill set and level of those within a certain vicinity to him. He was like the original Rogue or Hope Summers when it came to his mimicry abilities. Over time, some of the abilities he's taken, those of the original X-Men, set at their power levels that they were at originally, became permanent for him, and he no longer needed them nearby to use said powers. So he has those ones permanently. But it should be noted that they're capped at original level. Number 3. Caliban. Caliban made a brief appearance in the 2019 X-Force series in issue number 1, but only so that he could basically get shot in the chest. Yeah. Otherwise, although Caliban has been one of the main Morlocks that we've come to know in the comics over the years, he hasn't really made a lasting impression in any of the current X books, more acting as a victim in the brutal Krakoan massacre that rounded out the end of that first issue. Caliban has never really been depicted as a super powerful mutant, but he is an important character in terms of the story and the history of the X-Men. His mutant powers allow him to sense and detect other mutants, and other than that, his powers are conditional, really only kicking in when his life is threatened, granting him super strength and the ability to absorb and multiply the fear of others. Number 2. Layla Miller. Layla Miller is the wife of Jamie Madrox, Multiple Man, who we've seen quite a bit throughout Krakoa and the X-Books, as Jamie's dupes generally are used to undertake various massive work efforts on the island, and off the island. Whether he's aiding in Krakoan medicine and drug production, or helping to sew and create everyone's Hellfire Gala outfits at the behest of Jumbo Carnation. But while Jamie has been everywhere, Layla has been almost nowhere in sight. We do get a brief glimpse of her more recently through a computer screen, and then throughout a couple in-person panels in X-Corp issue number 3, where we learn that Jamie's and Layla's son, Davey, is about ready to take his first steps. Yay! Layla wants Jamie to leave the lab to come home and witness those steps, but Jamie responds that the launch he's supervising is too important and he can't leave. Layla frustratedly hangs up on him, and Jamie later sends a dupe in his place, planning to later absorb the dupe and therefore acquire the memories of being there with his son. But other than these few moments, Layla has been MIA. I know she's busy with Davey, but it would be really cool to see her in action, as she's a really cool mutant and a really cool character. So bring Layla back, please. Number 1. Destiny. Destiny is probably one of the most anticipated mutants to return. She has not been forgotten by her wife and lover Mystique or by readers, but pretty much everyone else on Krakoa seems to be interested in forgetting about her. But still, using her journals to likely try and figure out the future to come based on her prophecies. At least I assume that's what Moira McTaggart is doing with those journals. I especially want Destiny to come back because I just want to see her and Mystique reunited, and because I kind of want Mystique to sow chaos and destruction and just generally raise hell in order to get Destiny returned. And then I want to see that payoff, like I want to see it actually come to fruition. Just sounds like a cool story. We'll likely be getting something to that effect in Inferno, but only time will tell if Destiny will return or not, before, during, or afterwards. She might not return at all, because Alan Pryor's also coming back, so Inferno could be about that too.